Ron, it's great to have you here during our conscious movie of the month for What the Bleep, and give us a inside scoop and how you guys um, help to spread the word about the film through an integral marketing approach,
Mm-hmm.
which is very, very cool.
Yeah,
Um,
cool.
so if you could maybe just introduce yourself a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
give us
Sure.
a little of your background and how you found it.
Yeah, sure. Terrific. So if I can maybe just start from where I'm at the moment. So I'm a director and a facilitator with an organization here in Australia called Cornerstone Integral. And we specialize in leadership development and organizational development. So that's what I'm doing now. But it's, the seeds of what I'm doing now has gone back many years, and so to sort of pick up the thread with regards to what the Bleep. I was back in 2000. I was just finishing my studies in transpersonal psychology. I was a consultant. I was working with an organization in a voluntary capacity called the SLAM Network, which was a Spirituality, Leadership, and Management Network. So this is back in 2000, 2003, 2004. Around about 2004, we got wind, we got sort of heads up of a film which was making a little bit of impact in the American market called What the Bleep Do We Know? So Spirituality, Leadership, and Management Network. Get rid of my phone, sorry. Spirituality, Leadership, and Management Network were interested in what that film was about. And so we decided to check it out with the distributors and see what we could do to make an impact with it here in Australia. Yeah. So,
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tail and a beginning. Yeah.
That's great. So, how did you apply the integral approach to marketing the film?
Yeah, so we've seen the film, and what we try to do is we try to see the film from a third-person perspective. In other words, we've seen it as object, we've seen it as an artifact, and we tried not to get caught up in the content of the film. We didn't want to judge the film. What we wanted to see is this film a preliminary sort of exploration of the cultural creative? Is this what was happening in the cultural creative scene? About that time as well, I just finished reading Paul Ray's work, which made mention to cultural creatives, the rise of the cultural creatives. So SLAM as an organization seen this film and sort of thought, what if we drop this film into the Australian marketplace? Would it flush out anyone in the marketplace who would be in that sort of category as a cultural creative or a core cultural creative? So we wanted to experiment with the film, and we wanted to see if we could actually, prove that cultural creators were a phenomena in Australia as they seem to be in the USA. So that's what we wanted to do with it. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So from that perspective, Mark, we began to look at it from an integral perspective. And what we realized was that the content of the film was specifically touching the good, the true, and the beautiful. It was
the big three.
Yeah, the big three. It was a piece of art. It was having a message of interiority. It was also touching into, the community, if you like, the cultural creatives. So we took those three things. Okay, so SLAM as an organization, we're certainly interested in the convergence of mysticism and science. Could you be, could mysticism be informed by science? Could mysticism inform science? So that was our exploration. Uh, and so we were really intrigued with what would happen. So we took the film and we said, okay, where are the hot spots in Australia where cultural creatives would hide, or where would they be? Yeah. And so we did an analysis of the marketplace, I guess, and we targeted hotspots. But we didn't just target hotspots that were in the so-called sort of spirituality sort of space. We targeted physicists. We targeted corporates. We wanted to see if there was something else going on in those sorts of environments. And so when we sort of targeted those areas, we also commenced a communication strategy which was targeted at what the hot buttons and cold buttons would be of the sort of stratified layers in which we were targeting. So we targeted bikie gangs, we targeted fundamentalist church organizations, we targeted the corporate environment. We targeted yoga schools and green meme orientated. And we targeted each one of these hotspots with a particular message based upon what we think they would actually resonate to in terms of the spiral communication message. So that was our strategy.
Beautiful. Let's unpack that a little bit for people who don't know. Integral theory and spiral dynamics. The green meme is pluralism in the integral theory, and that's a stage of development, right? So you were targeting them as part of this whole thing, and they are. Would you say that most of the cultural creative field at that time was at that level?
Yes, that's what we suspected. We suspected that the cultural creators would be found most predominantly in that sort of pluralistic environment. Yeah,
and that would make sense because of the combination of subjectivity and objectivity of the film.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, but we also thought that none of these groups were actually communicating with each other. They were all operating in little silos of maybe introspection and inquiry themselves, not really realizing that this, or what they were part of, was a phenomena, an evolutionary phenomena, you could say, which went beyond their particular clique or niche, but was actually a societal phenomena. So,
okay. So then, how did this unfold? How did this process actually play out?
So we teamed up with the distributors here in Australia, and it was a joint operation. A company called Polyphony Entertainment and Hopscotch Films. They had also got wind of What the Bleep, and they didn't know what to do with it. It was an unusual film. They knew it was making box office impact in the States, but they didn't know what to do with it. It was out with any genre that they'd ever sort of involved with before. And so it was kind of like a synergistic moment. They didn't know what to do with it, and we approached them, and we said, hey, we think we know where this film would land, and we put a proposal to them, and they took the proposal, and they said, well, you guys go for it. You see what you can do with it, because we don't know what to do with it. And so they gave us an opportunity to experiment with it. And so they also were very generous, and they said, well, the way we think that this film would actually get traction would be if we get certain people along to a free viewing, so that they would begin to spread the word of mouth knowledge of the film to their networks, and we totally agreed with that. That was very much in alignment with what we thought would happen as well. So Hopscotch Polyphony set up some cinemas around Australia, and it was about 12 right across Australia, from Perth in the west right across to Byron Bay in the east, and Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane, right across Australia. And our task as the Spirituality Leadership and Management Network was to get the people to the free viewing. Well, that's what we had to do. We had to find them and get them there. We had to get them interested. So you remember, this is back in 2004, 2005. Viral marketing was not even in consciousness of marketing organizations back then, because the internet was very much in its infancy, and the communication by email was very much peer-to-peer. And so what we were able to do is to instigate a viral marketing campaign which spread the word out from each of these special interest groups. And so what happened was we had, you know, these cinemas around the country. We were getting 200 to 250 people coming along to watch the movie. And sure, everybody likes a freebie, so it wasn't, you know, a big ask really. But what we were asking for was their time to come along and see something that that the Slam Network felt it was intriguing, and so they came. They came, and we also, you know, were conscious about them just not seeing the movie, then, you know, going away off and doing their own thing. So we tried to sort of corral them into an action commitment that they could take away with them, with some sort of direction, intentionality of how many people they could tell about the film in their networks. Because the people that we got to the film were very much the key influencers, the centers of influences in each of the organizations or entities that we got coming to the film. So it was the viral nature of it, which I think was very intriguing.
Yeah. Now, I think I remember, I'm reading in your materials that you also made sure that the audiences weren't all one segment.
Yes.
Combined them. Yeah. Could you talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So we felt that where the maximum stimulation would come from would be if we were able to get multiple perspectives in the cinema at the same time. So it just wasn't just yoga schools that were in the cinema at the same time. We got physicists, we got corporates, we got you know, some unionist movements, we got you know, the yoga schools as well. So we devised a recipe which made the maximum amount of perspectives possible to be in the room. We also, at the conclusion of the film, had a panel. We curated a panel of experts, an expert scientist, an expert community leader, an expert in contemplative traditions. We had them at the end of the film on a panel, and we did a Q&A session with them, so the audience could ask their questions from their perspective, and we could sort of mix it up in terms of the multiple perspectives in the room who had a different point of view about the content of the film. Wow. And it was kind of like a perspective soup, Mark.
Well, that is beautiful.
And yeah, the multiple perspectives that were there, each one of them had something to contribute, and yeah, we facilitated it pretty well in terms of there wasn't a bias in any particular way, but what resulted was an extremely stimulating discussion, and on a number of occasions the cinema had to throw us out. Because, you know, we were taking up too much of the time, and it was going into, you know, the late evening, and so it was really vibrant. was really vibrant environment.
Mm, mm. So it feels like you kind of took the hybrid nature of the film
Yeah.
and kind of created a hybrid experience for the audience as well. You hybridize the audience with the hybridized elements from the film in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be right, and I think that came about because we took an objective perspective on it. Here's the film. Let's not be involved in the film's message, but let's just look at the film from an objective perspective. And so that gave us a little elevated, perspective on it, and that itself gave us a little distance from it, rather than saying, hey, you got to watch this because we believe in what it's saying. No, that wasn't the message. We were saying you got to watch this because it is interesting, is actually provoking some interesting insights. We want to know what that insight is for you, and we want you to share that insight with others, which will enable you to understand what others think of this film. And at the same time, we all might learn something about the state of this convergence between science and mysticism, mysticism and science. Is there a connection here happening? Let's explore it together.
So by becoming objective about it, you didn't get caught in a single perspectival field.
Correct.
Absolutely. And so then you could actually then see all the different perspectives it was playing with, and then use it as a kind of collective teaching, learning process. Yeah?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way, that is kind of the heart of the film, to make us think, to make us kind of wonder, and open up what we're actually, what reality is.
Yes.
So it's great that you took that into the screening as like, what is, is this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this it, or is it something else? Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing for us is we were part of that whole process was we just began to see this thing spread like wildfire, and it was totally out of our hands at a certain stage. It just ballistically exploded in the Australian sort of scene, and everybody was talking about it. At that point in time, this is about April 2005, when the film was in Australia. Hopscotch and Polyphony, who were, they're pretty good at marketing what they do. They get good film distribution in Australia. They were contacting me and said, Ron, what are you doing? What's happening? Because we're getting the first round of box office takings, and it's blitzing all the main shows that are on in the mainstream cinemas at the moment. What's going on? And they pulled in one of the experts on film distribution out of retirement early in the piece to try and help them market this film. And she was calling me. She was saying, hey, Ron, what are you guys doing there? We've never seen a film of this kind of nature, and we've never seen it impact the way this film has impacted in terms of box office takings. This is incredible what's going on. So we were actually, piquing people's interest about what we were doing, not just for the film, but the marketers of film in Australia. And we were getting some media ourselves about how we were doing it.
Because you were basically going outside of their constructs, man. They just, like, what is going on here? We have no idea what you're doing, but it's working.
Yeah.
So that's, that's beautiful. Wow, that's so great. So the filmmakers were talking about that it felt like what they were doing was in some kind of a zeitgeist field. Like, they were in this You know,
Hmm.
it sounds like you were feeling that too, like something was going on here. You were
Yeah,
on edge, and even you were
yeah.
playing that edge. Yes, you were playing that edge, like saying,
Hmm.
we think there's cultural creatives out there, but how do we find them? So
Yeah.
you were kind of on the edge. So like the film, it seems to me, was coming right in this edge of
Hmm.
the cultural creative field.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was. And we were deliberately playing that hand, Mark. I mean, a part of our experiment was, let's, as I said earlier, let's just drop it into the Australian psyche and see what happens. Is there something going on here that can be flushed out, that we can get a look at, we can connect with, that we can maybe co-create with, and maybe we can coalesce. And Slam as an organization we're like that. We had a network of cafes that were happening around Australia where people came together to have conversation about spirituality, leadership, and management. So it was right in our field of exploration itself. So it was really kind of it was the right film for the right time, for the right place, for the right people. It
Yeah.
was one of those moments. Yeah.
Hmm. And what was it like to be surfing inside that moment?
You know what? There was some sort of fear and trepidation on behalf of Hopscotch Films and Polyphony, because they'd obviously made an investment, and whatever they do as distributors in terms of acquiring a film. They'd also made a commitment to hiring these 12 cinemas across the country without even knowing what the result of all that would be. So there was a little tension in their camp in terms of what to expect, but we were pretty, we were pretty confident when we began to see some of the initial responses, and we began to hear the sort of excitement beginning to spread. And although we had never done anything like this before, but we were kind of working on some principles. We were working on an integral principle, first of all, right? We said, okay, we are looking at this film from as broad and as comprehensive a perspective as you possibly can. And we looked at it from the four quadrants, from, I, we, and it. We looked at it from that comprehensive view. We also looked at it from the spiral dynamics, levels of existence theory point of view. What's the stratified sort of levels and value systems we're communicating with, and how do we communicate at each level? So we knew that we fundamentally had some principles in place, were pretty solid principles. And if we just use this film as the artifact within that sort of dynamic, we thought, well, this is our best goal. And it was at that point in time, I can remember us saying, this is kind of like the application of integral theory, isn't it? This is like an application. Yeah. And there wasn't, 2014, there wasn't many applications of integral theory or spiral dynamics at that point in time. It was still very much on the frothy edge itself, if not still on the frothy edge. But we were kind of pioneering its application by working with commercial entities on spiritual content. Now, that was an interesting combination in itself. There was the commercial entities of the film distribution companies working with a spiritually orientated organization. So we took hats off to them and say, hey, you know what? You guys are pioneering. Just go along with us. We'll make this happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
would you say that like the distributors were kind of at the rational stage, the orange, and then and the film was obviously at the next stage of pluralistic, and they couldn't reach over, but they saw that it was working somewhere.
Yeah.
So they wanted to tap into it, but it was outside of their field.
Totally.
So they were kind of, I guess, close enough to the edge to be willing to open up and see what can happen.
I would like to say there was a conscious choice on their part, but it was more kind of like a inspiration, you know, what the hell do we do with this? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm curious. Did you actually were did you actually find the cultural creatives in all those different fields? You know, like in the corporate area, in the science community. I mean, did you find them everywhere?
Yeah, we found pockets. We found some of the work that was going on in Australia about that point in time in the corporate arena with one of the large banks. They were pushing the edge a little bit in terms of the leadership programs that we were implementing in the banking sort of sector at that point in time. And so we found small pockets of cultural creatives in the corporate sector, and in particular the banking sector, mostly in the learning and development and organizational development field within the banking sector. We found some really progressive physicists who were, you know, beginning to move, an interesting, you know, beginning to move from physics to futures.
Hmm.
Physicists who were beginning to become futurists.
Ah,
Uh,
interesting.
yeah. So it was interesting. They were beginning to sort of, you know, get a glimpse into their own sort of area, which was beginning to get them to think about, you know, projecting what could happen. And so that we found some cultural creators in those sort of sectors as well. Obviously, you found that in the New Age movement, there was a lot of New Age movement sort of stuff happening around as well. That sort of mythic magic sort of arena, which didn't really have really rational, you know, objective views on what they believed in. But there was some within that sort of sector who were beginning to question their belief and had to put a more rational sort of viewpoint around what their mythic magic sort of viewpoint was. We also found some cultural creatives within the fundamentalist religious groups
Really?
that targeting
Wow.
as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating.
Those who were maybe in that sort of phase of going through the fundamentalist, but asking questions from a rational perspective, which weren't getting rational answers from the fundamentalist movement gurus. Right. So we found people from fundamentalist religious groups coming to see the film, and that was kind of supporting their sense of spirituality, but not in a purely religious context. Yeah.
Ah.
So
Wow.
their questioning was beginning to be flushed out a little bit and encouraged, you
Wow.
know. So that was interesting. You know, and at times when we did have mythic magic, you know, fundamentalist religions, corporate executives, physicists in the same room making comment on this film, you could see what was going on. We were actually curating the spiral in each of
Hmm.
these sections. We were making sure that it was represented to flush it all out and see if it can come
Wow.
to a
Oh
different
my gosh.
perspective.
So to give the people who don't, oh, I'm not totally familiar yet.
Yeah.
You, just we're talking about here is the magic, mythic. Those are stages of development as well. And so there's magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral are
Mhm.
kind of like from the
Yeah.
integral theory
Yeah.
perspective. And in spiral dynamics, it's very similar, but they're called different things and they are
Yeah.
slightly different. But to just
Yeah.
to help
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So the New Age movement. Now I know there's a lot of interesting kind of dynamics around the film, from
Mm.
in terms of people like some people saying, "Oh, it's just new agey kind of stuff."
Yeah.
And but I also found in the integral community some folks saying, "Well, I don't know, it's got some integral stuff going on too."
Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm.
So did you find any kind of information in that area? And in Australia, was the New Age um, movement similar to the U.S., or did it have a little different spin to it?
Yeah, there was a similarity in Australia in terms of the New Age movement and its sort of where it was sort of positioning itself in Australia. So I mean, I was also part of. I used to run community groups here in Australia on behalf of the Institute of Noetic Science. You know, it was part of the thing that I used to do, and I used to love ION's material because it had a real scientific approach to what would otherwise been seen as a new age construct. You know, and so I felt that the movie was also trying to do that as well, you know, to have a, you know, a scientific approach to a new age construct. And whether that was totally credible or not, I mean, maybe yeah, maybe no. But I thought that the mere fact that there's these two perspectives playing with each other was important from an integral perspective, I felt. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's trying to integrate two fields,
Yes.
two construct fields,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
And it was
integral.
probably, yeah, exactly. That was probably secondary to what our interest was. Primarily was this cultural creative move. And if there was a cultural creative and core cultural creatives there, then from our perspective, integral was next, you know? An integral perspective is the next sort of level of construct. And so, you know, we would say, well, if we gather cultural creatives together, within those cultural creatives, we will probably find some seeds of integral thinkers. We'll probably find people who are sort of playing with that idea of themselves. We're interested in talking to them as well. So as an organization, you know, SLAM as an organization, getting a sort of sense of cultural creatives, we also wanted to play from that half step ahead sort of positioning. They said, well, what's next after cultural creatives? What's the integral, you know, point of view that's going to emerge from that? So we wanted to push that edge a little bit, but that was probably, you know, a nice to have rather than a got to have sort of outcome of our exploration with the film here in Australia.
And did you have that outcome? Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We did. You know, we had some great people come into our sphere. You know, and I'll say this from an integral perspective, that Australia is pretty progressive when it comes to the integral movement. We have some really key figures over here applying integral. And I think the fact that, you know, we were able to sort of till the soil, I think, with what we did with What the Bleep, to seed conversation into the Australian soil in terms of integral perspectives. So we've got a pretty mature integral body here in Australia. And in fact, my understanding is Australia is the only place in the world that actually had an Australian version of the Integral Institute endorsed by him. Yeah. So there's a group here. Now, we can't claim to be the seed for every one of those people, but I think that, you know, the conversations that we've have led into other conversations, which have led into other conversations and networked together. And so there is a sort of fairly firm foundation of integral folks here which are in conversation with each other in Australia.
Beautiful, man. That's really great.
Mm.
Wow.
Mm.
So, looking back on it all,
Yeah.
um, do you have some like reflections, like in terms of the, just
Yeah. It was interesting because when I seen your post on Facebook, what the Beatles, oh wow, I remember that. And what it did, it provoked me to go into some of the the files I had created back then, just to guide this strategy, and some of the notes I had taken, and I've sent a little synopsis across to you to try and explain the chronology of events that happened. And so I look back at it with a great deal of fondness. And, I think we were doing something pioneering with Integral and Spiral back then. And it was a lot of fun too. And in the film, it's interesting enough, when you look at it, it was still ranked in the top 50 documentaries ever marketed in Australia 5 years after it was released. It did over $1.6 million at the box office. An indie film of that nature, wasn't even on the radar of the Australian U-Butte, throw another prawn on the Barbie kind of psyche, So I think when we look at it, and I'm looking at it now, I kind of want to know about other applications of Integral that is being done around the world in a similar sort of way, or using Spiral the way that we use Spiral to tap into culture, using something that is able to coalesce a lot of people together at the same time. And so that actually sparked a couple of initiatives which are still current with what kind of work that I do, is getting people together in that sort of regard. So there was a lot of seeds for my own work that came out of that experience that I reconnected with. I said, oh, right, wow, that thread there, I can see how that thread is impacted the work that I'm doing now, and the perspectives that I work with now, and the interventions I work with now. So it was formative.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That is really cool.
Yeah.
It just was really kind of what kind of is blowing me away right now is that it seems like you kind of, when you had the objective big picture view of the film, you were able to kind of pull out a way of distributing it that was almost extending the 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 questioning streams of the film itself.
Yes. 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 Yeah. So, which makes me remember, as the film began to go viral, and we were seen as being a catalyst for that happening, there was an expectation placed on us as an organization to do something about it, right? There was an expectation placed on us to coordinate the meetup groups who wanted to come together to talk to the film. We were being inundated with requests with, what are you going to do with it now? Where do we go with it now? When are we having a meeting? Who's, so, and bear in mind, we SLAM organization, Spirituality, Leadership and Management Network, was a voluntary not-for-profit organization that had no resources at all to do it with this. And so the people began to sort of, place expectation of us, which we couldn't fulfill. We didn't have the resources. So that was kind of like unfortunate. It would have been great if we had, but we didn't. But interesting enough, I think what is interesting is that rather than individuals within those sorts of moments of wanting to get together again, doing their own organizing themselves, being independent enough to, be a catalyst themselves, being sort of keen to get other people, rather than them doing that, they didn't do anything with it, which was interesting. There was still a dependency on an entity to do it for them. Yeah, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so within that, we felt, well, really, the volition or the intent is still tied to the mothership. And what we really would have liked to have seen is independent pockets of individuals self-organizing themselves around the content rather than the expectation of an organization to do it for them.
But I think that wasn't possible at that time, where the system was like, because right now, at least here in the States, that's happening. The self-organizing collective intelligence fields are coming online now.
Yes.
Here,
Yeah,
anyways.
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, there wasn't that mechanism. The internet was still very much early days. There wasn't that network system. The system wasn't in place.
Yeah. So now the technology has reached that point of giving us that capacity.
Yeah. There was a cultural interest, but the system didn't actually support the cultural interest at that point in time, which is an interesting sort of evolutionary sort of notion to that, is that
yes we're talking about here. Yeah, just for those people out there, this is great stuff here, so I want to unpack it just real quick. It's like what tetraevolution is that there's 4 dimensions of our reality, let's say, real simple. We've got the subjective, the internal individual, what's inside of me, thoughts, feelings, and all that. We've got our objective, our bodies, our behavior, the objective reality, this chair, this room, and all that. And then we have relational fields, community, culture, relationships. And then the 4th quadrant is systemic, environmental. And so what sounds like you had there is a gap between the systemic, which hadn't reached a point of supporting what was going on, and the subjective or even behavioral, because people were reaching out for it. But the systemic infrastructure wasn't there to support it. It didn't happen at that time.
That's right.
Interesting.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Wow.
And one would wonder if, a film of that nature was dropped into, the psyche now with, the event of easily accessible networking, what would happen? And to some extent, that's probably happening right now, in many ways. Doesn't need a film like What the Bleep, but there's other stimulus material that people are collecting around globally that keep people, connected. Like even you and I having this conversation so clearly, me from Australia, you from the US, without too much of an interference in terms of static or noise. That's great. We're connecting.
Actually, this is actually quite profound what's happening. I'm continually kind of blown away.
Yeah.
Because here we are.
Yeah.
We're thousands of miles apart. So
Yeah.
we're transcending space, right? We're
Yeah.
transcending time in terms of you're tomorrow and I'm your yesterday.
It's
You're my
right.
tomorrow and I'm your, I mean, that's a trip to me. And wait a minute, here is summer. There
Yeah.
is winter, right?
Yeah.
And
Warming.
so we
Yeah.
are actually transcending time and space in this moment
Absolutely. Absolutely.
with our technology.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're moving to a world-centric perspective. There's no doubt about it. The world-centrism, the pockets of it everywhere. And, if I can just sort of, give you a little idea, where what the bleep has led to, I kind of alluded to the fact that it's influencing my work now. I run a simulation program called We Are One World, which is a large-scale live-action role play involving up to 120 people at a time. It's played on a Buckminster Fuller Dymaxion map, which is 12 meters wide by 5 meters, 12 meters long by 5 meters wide. And these 120 people get to run the world from it for a day. And so We Are One World is a world-centric simulation event game which enables people to just do that, enables them to see the world from the highest perspective possible, from an objective reality point of view. They stand on a map of the world and they're looking down as at the same height as a satellite, and they get to move around this sort of environment and interact with other people who are trying to run the world for a day as well, in an interactive exploration. And it's really sort of what thinking about what the bleep was a movie that I felt was pushing people to a world-centric perspective. We wanted to flesh that out in the cultural creatives. The work that I do today is all about what techniques and innovations and things that we can do to actually elevate people's perspective, because that's where it's at. It's where it's going.
I mean,
And
that's amen, because I'm preaching that myself. I mean, I'm going. I mean, it's like I really kind of see this moment as a major evolutionary point, a challenge point, and I mean, just as we're talking here, this is a great example of how our technologies are really at world-centric and beyond.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're talking about, we just recently talked about how virtual reality is an integral technology.
Yeah.
So, but the problem that I see, that many of us see, is that our social institutions and structures are still at orange.
Yes. Yeah.
At rational industrial. So we've got like a three or four stage gap in some places.
Yeah.
Which is why we're having such a major kind of shift here. Challenge.
Absolutely. And you could say that the polarization is the extension, that there is this sort of regression and progression, going in two different directions at the same time. Well, if we kind of follow that trajectory, something's going to have to snap, and it's where it snaps and what manifests next out of that collapse, I think, is the interesting sort of thing for us to be looking at. If it is a collapse or a whimper, whatever it is. But
hopefully we can make it a whimper.
I mean, guys like you and guys like me, I think that's what we're intending to do, is how do we make it a whimper and not a snap?
Yeah, that's the mission. That's the mission, man.
That's it. So, give people the kind of perspective that, as Buckminster Fuller used to say, we are all astronauts on a little spaceship called Earth. We need to have that perspective, the predominant perspective. The technology gives a systemic reality of that. The culture is not, coming up with the necessary, perspective to match with what the culture, the technology is doing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is a great point to finish on,
Yeah.
because a lot of our audience are media makers.
Right.
And so it's like, we need everyone we can, to, to help, we have to get as
Absolutely.
many of us as we can out there to
Yeah.
try to use our media technologies
Yes.
to, how I like to say it is that our technologies have accelerated so
Yes.
fast, but our evolution of consciousness happened to equal that acceleration.
Absolutely.
But if we can use these technologies to do
Yes.
that, so we can catch up, that's the mission,
Absolutely.
right?
Fantastic.
That's the
Totally
mission.
100% with you on that, Mark. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great
All right.
work.
So
Great
we
work.
have our work cut out for us, yeah.
We do indeed. There's a lot of work to be done.
But good work,
Inspiring work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
been amazing.
Yeah, thank you.